Good morning, everybody. It's Jesse, and I'm back again for another installment of Social School, the first video for the month of February. And for those of you who didn't see it last time, I let you guys know that we're starting a new unit. We're going to be talking about social awareness or understanding the feelings of others. And the video for today is going to discuss some of the barriers, some of the problems. What are some of the things that get in the way of our ability to understand other people? And so specifically what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about prejudice, intolerance, and discrimination. And as I bring up this topic, a lot of people think about racism, sexism, ageism, but really prejudice specifically is just about when we pass judgment on someone, or we think that we know them just by looking at them, or just kind of knowing what group they belong to, or even putting people into groups and categories really gets in the way of our ability to understand another human being. And so we're going to look at some different examples. We're going to, maybe I'll make some jokes, I'll, play around with this a little bit, but it is a very serious topic because in the workplace, obviously there's no place for intolerance or discrimination. And so, again, as we look at this, we just kind of want to think to ourselves, is it possible, that you have some prejudices, and are those prejudices getting in the way of you having, an understanding for the feelings of others, having understanding for the differences of others, and eventually we'll talk about, how do we overcome this in an effort to understand our customers, our coworkers, and our bosses better. And so, before I go too far with this, I just want to introduce some of these key terms and kind of give you an overview of what we're going to be looking at today. So again, the first of the terms that we're going to talk about is prejudice. And what this definition says in front of you is an opinion formed beforehand, especially an unfavorable one that is based on inadequate facts. And basically what this comes down to is passing judgment or making assumptions. And we all know, what they say about assumptions. When you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. But yeah, we're all guilty of this. Every single one of us has made a judgment or has passed judgment on someone without really knowing them, without knowing who they really are. And then as we look at this and we go down my scale, things kind of get worse. So the next term is intolerance. And intolerance is lacking respect for practices or beliefs other than one's own, not able or willing to tolerate. And this comes into play when we make jokes about someone, when we exclude someone, when our opinions are very negative, and we start to, when things come out of our mouth or those sorts of things, that's when, intolerance kind of comes in. I hate this person, I hate those sorts of people, those sorts of things. And then the last one, and the most serious of these, is discrimination. And in discrimination, you unfairly treat someone based on their age or their racial group, some kind of minority or a disability. When we start to mistreat people, then that's when discrimination really becomes a problem. And as we'll see, this is very serious, and fortunately in America illegal. But we're also going to spend a minute, or more than a minute, and talk about the problems of discrimination. So let's go ahead and jump right into it, and I'm going to break this down for you. But it starts with prejudice, and that's a word that you've probably heard before. And again, when some people think, oh, that's prejudice, you're prejudiced, we're talking about racism or sexism, but that's actually a whole different thing. Basically, prejudice happens when you think that you know somebody, and just by looking at them or a quick judgment, and really you probably don't. So we're going to look at some examples here of some prejudices that people might have. Meet Bob. Bob's just a regular guy on a regular day. He's driving his convertible on a nice sunny day through the parking lot of your place of employment. And we look at a picture like this, and we start to wonder, what are some prejudices that people have about I don't know, say old people and how they drive? Are there jokes? Are there things, that people might assume about Bob just by looking at him? What are some common prejudices that we might have against a guy like Bob? When I look at Bob, I have to acknowledge that, I have some prejudice against Bob. But it might be that my prejudices are a little bit different than yours. When I look at Bob, unfortunately, I have some prejudices, and I'm not proud of these, but I have some prejudices that I have to admit. And so as I look at Bob, I notice some things. And, I'm going to give him 3, 4 strikes against him. Strike 1, Bob is white. Strike 2, Bob is a man. Strike 3, I think that Bob might actually be rich. I'm looking at this car and I'm thinking he might have some money. And when you put those 3 things together, a man who's white, who's probably rich, I have another prejudice, and I have judged this guy before I've even met him or talked to him. I think that Bob might be the R word. And what I mean by that is Republican, right? So as I look at my prejudices, I have to acknowledge that I have these, right? That these are attitudes that I've developed, right or wrong. And so when we look at our prejudices, we have to think about, our backgrounds and where we come from. And I have to tell you that I, as a child, grew up poor in Edwardsville. And Edwardsville is a town that is known for, having some rich white men. And as I went through school, I found myself being judged by the rich kids that I went to school with. And some of them would make fun of me because I got my clothes from Walmart, or, you know what I mean, just I lived in the wrong neighborhood. And they would make fun of me. And also, I grew up as a minority white person in predominantly African American neighborhoods. And so I was told by my African American friends that, white people are all racist. And so as I grew up, I kind of took on some of these prejudices, right or wrong. I took on some of these prejudices as my own. And as someone who is kind of liberal and a Democrat, I've come to assume that old rich white men are all racist. And all, Republicans are racist. And so as I look at these prejudices from an outsider's perspective, I realize that, this isn't real. It's not realistic for me to think that I know Bob just by looking at him. And when I think that I do, I am definitely having prejudice. And so as we think about these prejudices and the problems that they might cause, I will tell you again, my business is here in Edwardsville, and there are a lot of those old rich white guys. If I was unwilling or unable to work with Bob or to see past my prejudices, it would definitely hurt my business. And so I have to acknowledge in myself that I have a prejudice. There is some attitudes, some judgments that I've made about Bob, and I have to find a way to see past that, because if I don't, it will, in the end, it will hurt my potential for working with Bob. It will, maybe hurt my business. And just in general, when we pass judgment on people, we're wrong. So I'm just going to kick this one off and say, you know what, even I have prejudices. And so I want you to think for a minute about maybe, what are some of the prejudices that you have that might be getting in the way of you understanding the feelings of others, or treating other human beings just as they are, like human beings, without passing judgment on them. And so as I look at my prejudices and think about it from other people's perspective, you might think to yourself, but wait, Jesse, you're white. Maybe some of you have noticed. But wait, Jesse, you're a man. How can you be prejudiced against your own group? And it happens frequently. I have known many females over the course of my professional life who did not get along with females, who passed judgment on other people just because they were women, or didn't like to work with women, or men who couldn't necessarily get along with men. I've known people who were African American who passed judgment on African Americans, or Mexican Americans who pass judgment on their own people and their own kinds. And so it is entirely possible for us to have prejudices against our own groups, and that creates a whole other problem. And so again, just need to think about, how are your prejudices affecting you? How are your judgments affecting your ability to maybe even understand yourself? Now we move on to the next level in our discussion of barriers to understanding the feelings of others, or barriers to social awareness. And the second of our terms is intolerance. It says lacking respect for practices or beliefs other than one's own, not able or willing to tolerate or endure. And the poster child for this is something called a Karen. And if you look at the picture below, I love this meme because I think a lot of us, if you know what a Karen is, might assume that the woman in this picture is a Karen. And basically what a Karen is a white person who is intolerant, who is entitled, who thinks that somehow, she's better than other people. And so, we might judge an angry white woman and just assume that by looking at her, that she's a Karen. And so when we start putting labels on people, especially if they're jokes, then, we are lacking respect for that human being. And so we don't know this person. We don't know if her name is Karen or not. She might be a Julie or a Jenny. There's just no way to know. But when we think about intolerance, when you make jokes about other people, or you say things or make comments, then you're practicing intolerance. And it becomes a problem because when we start to, say these things or do them in the workplace, it's the sort of thing that can really get us into trouble. And you might think that by making a joke, that you're being funny, but you never really know what someone's background is or what their attitudes might be. And so you really have to look at yourself and be on guard for this intolerance. Now, don't get me wrong, I like jokes as much as the next person. And having worked for years with people of different heritages and different backgrounds, I've heard plenty of white guy jokes, but a lot of times those jokes, well, first of all, I can't share those here because they're not appropriate for this venue. But when we start calling names or making jokes, I have actually been the victim of intolerance before. And so having had it, pointed at me, I've been called a cracker. I've heard those white guy jokes. I hear bald jokes all the time. People are constantly making fun of my shiny dome. But those things in the wrong place at the wrong time can be very hurtful, and they can get you in trouble. And so, as I said before, it's one thing to try to be funny, but you never know who's listening or what's going on. And so as we make these jokes or crack these jokes, we need to think about our audience, and it's not just the person that you're talking to, it's anybody that might be listening. And so when you start to label people or call them by a name, then you are practicing intolerance. And so as we look at people from different races and religions, and just in our casual lives, when we tell jokes about people, we are definitely lacking respect. And so this brings us to the third category in our barriers to social awareness, or understanding the feelings of others. And this is called discrimination, unfair treatment of a person, racial group, minority, etc., an action that is based on prejudice. And this is where racism, sexism, ageism, ableism, which is discriminating against people on the basis of a disability, this is where these things come in. And as we think about, what causes problems in the workplace, discrimination is probably easily the worst of my three categories. When we start to treat people unfairly on the basis of their differences and not try to understand who they really are as a human being, then we have definitely set up a barrier to our ability to have understanding for the feelings of others. And as you look at this group, you can that's in front of you, you can start to see some of the groups who might have been discriminated against. And the truth of the matter is, if we looked at this and were truly honest with ourselves, we would start to realize that in one way or another, probably all of us have been discriminated against. For my last slide, I want to share with you a picture. I want you to imagine that this guy's name here on the right, his name is Ibrahim. And Ibrahim is an American citizen. He is a Muslim, and he has been a citizen of the United States for almost his entire life. But as we think about discrimination and groups that might be discriminated against, I think it would be good for us to think about what it might be like for Abraham. Is it possible that people would have prejudice against Abraham? And the answer is, of course it is possible that people might have prejudice against someone on the basis of the fact that he was a Muslim. I will tell you that when I have showed pictures like this to students before, oftentimes one of the first words that will come out of their mouth is, "Oh, he's a terrorist." Or, I've heard terrible racist things and insulting comments just based on the way that Abraham looks. And so we think, yes, he has probably been the victim of prejudice, but also intolerance. And so it is possible that in his life, even though he's an American citizen, people may have called him a terrorist before, or he has been treated unfairly, which would be discrimination. But people may have made comments, some of the racist things that people have thought maybe have come out of their mouth, or maybe he's heard jokes. But it is also entirely possible that Abraham has experienced discrimination. And what I mean by that is that there have in the United States been acts of violence that were committed against people simply because they were Muslim. And you think about in the place of work, there are definitely examples where people have been passed up for jobs or would not be considered for certain jobs simply because they are Muslim. And that is definitely discrimination. And that is definitely against the law. And so, thank goodness that we live in a country where people are protected against these things, because in my story, Abraham is an ideal American citizen. He votes, he takes care of his family, he contributes to the community, and he does all those things. And unfortunately, he is still discriminated against. So the question that we have to ask ourselves now is, what do we do with this information? So, maybe you are able to recognize that, you have some prejudices, there are some stereotypes or assumptions that you make about people, and just recognizing that is a great first step. But hopefully we can all recognize that intolerance is something that is definitely not a good idea and certainly inappropriate in the workplace. Whether it's in your personal life or otherwise, to say mean and hurtful things is definitely not the move and not the sort of thing that you want to do. And also, we want to be on the lookout for discrimination. And think to yourself, have I ever treated someone unfairly based on my prejudice? And so you want to really, again, just kind of check in with yourself, give this some honest thought, and recognize, that if it's wrong for people to do these things to us, to judge us, to say things about us, or treat us unfairly, then you have to realize that it is definitely wrong for us to do this to other people. And as we move forward and continuing lessons, what I'm going to do is kind of talk about, how do we break through these barriers to social awareness in an effort to become better people, better workers, better students, better citizens of the United States, and better citizens of the world. How do we do this? Unfortunately, I am out of time for today. So that is going to conclude this video. I want to thank everybody so much for tuning in and watching me, and I look forward to either seeing you guys soon or the next installment of Social School. Have a great day.